All right, Money Mythbusters, episode 7. Welcome, guys. Happy Friday. Nate, you're back.
Happy Friday, I'm back. Sorry I had to miss last week, but it's for good reason. So happy to be back today.
That's okay. Audience got a sense of Raymond and his dad charging him some money for a taxi ride. So
So
that
funny.
that was fun. And Raymond's dad, if you're watching, don't do it again, okay? It's not how it works. But again, welcome everyone. Money Mythbusters, episode 7 here. We're rolling along, loving the episodes we're doing, getting some good feedback. And today we get to talk about a little bit something different. We've talked a lot about real estate and a little bit about investing. Today is more catered towards your personal finances. More importantly, budgeting, right? Like, I didn't mean to say it with some negative connotation, but I think it came out that way. But budgeting.
That's how most people think about it. It's such a negative word.
It is. We're gonna have some positive spin on it. So budgeting, right? That's kind of where we're going for that kind of feel. And I think, the way that people think about budgeting just is so widely across the board. So we're gonna give you our take on it. Okay. Of course, this is our take. It's our opinion on it. But of course, it's worked for a lot of people just to kind of reframe it this way. Okay. But first off, I think the myth that we're talking about today is more about, hey, look, if I am maxing out my 401k, I'm good to go in my retirement. Like, I am good to go. I'm saving enough, right? So we're going to talk about that in just 1 second. Before we get to that part, always, right? What we're talking about today here is for general education, general financial education, which we love doing. We love providing these clips to you guys and ability to learn more without really a concern that we're trying to sell you anything, right? It's really just trying to be as objective as possible. So what we're doing right now is really from a standpoint of education and not from a personal financial advice perspective. We are going to talk a little bit about investments potentially, right? Getting into thinking about 401ks. But when we do, and when we talk about investing, it's not meant to be any solicitation of any type of investment products, right? Again, education purpose only. And then finally, of course, taxes. If we mention things about taxes, right, it's so that you guys can learn about the idea of it. And if you guys have particular questions that go back to some specifics on tax rules, right, your tax preparer is the perfect person to ask those questions. All right. And so Nate, tell us a little bit about it, right? If I am maxing out my 401k, am I good? Can I retire at 50? Is that what's going to happen?
It's a great wish.
So you're telling me you're going to make me work past 50. I got you.
I mean, there's so many problems with that statement. Let's start with the obvious one in that 401k money can't be touched until 59 and a half, right? And so a lot of our tech workers, obviously with us being in the Bay Area, probably don't retire at 59 and a half. Ageism is certainly not supposed to exist, but it's really tough to stay employed as an older engineer. So 50 might be needed, 55 might be needed. But now we have a gap of when you can actually touch that money to when you actually retire. So that's one problem. Second problem, you're probably contributing to your 401k pre-tax, which is probably wise because we want the tax break now. But when you draw it, it's going to be taxable income. So you may be overestimating how much money you're going to be receiving when you draw that income from 401k. The other problem is we haven't even touched on how much you need for retirement, right? Because of our expensive homes here, maybe you haven't paid off your mortgage. Does your monthly budget cost you $5K a month, $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month, right? Just because you're maxing out your 401k doesn't mean that you're going to be able to sustain your lifestyle in retirement. So those are 3 very obvious problems with that statement. And it's not even touching on maybe some of the shorter term goals that you might have before retirement, right?
Yeah. And look, I think the idea that it's my retirement account, because it's the way that it's structured, right? The 401k is a retirement account. And thus anything else I can use for other things, right? The reality is, right, what you're trying to save and what you put together, whether it's in a retirement account, whether it's in a brokerage account, again, something we just talked about in our webinar that we were streaming more generally to people about the different vehicles. A brokerage account, something that comes after your paycheck and you're putting it away. Those are all things that are going towards goals being retirement. That's a long-term goal, but it's using all of it to fund it. Now, I know if you're watching this, you're saying, well, like, there's so many particular pieces about long-term planning, that how do I even get started, right? And so I want to, I think about, and ask me, like, the general savings philosophy, I think a lot of people have trouble with, right? Like the idea that, you know what, I just need to stock something away. So I put it away. Like, I'm just going to, like, the first step, right? Like the first step that we hear all the time for someone who really wants to save because they have the right intentions, what do? They're like, oh, I'm just going to stack $500 in this account. I'm saving. What's wrong with that, though? Like, what's wrong with that idea of doing that?
Has nothing to do with your actual budget, right? How much do you actually need to spend, want to spend, should you spend? And without looking at the actual budget, how do we know how much we can save? Is 500 and none? Chances are, like, maybe you actually don't go through a budget exercise and recognize what your actual spending is. Maybe you can save $2,000 a month. We should really be maximizing your ability to save, not just picking what seems like a random number to save just so you can say you're participating in the act of saving, right? And so for especially Bay Area finances, I always try to recommend clients to save at least 20% of their income. National average, unfortunately, is only like 5. So it's really, really low. But we should really be optimizing your budget to maximize your savings, all with the idea of the more we can save, the sooner we can retire, right? The more we can save, the sooner we can buy that house. The more we save, the sooner we can buy that car. And so as much as people dread the idea of budgeting, it's also that you can understand your ability to maximize your savings so that we have a better idea of when you can accomplish those goals. Unless we don't know how much, if we're not optimizing, we don't know when we can accomplish those goals. Yeah, maybe, based on your income, maybe a $2 million house can be achieved in 5 years. I have no idea if that's achievable if I don't know how much you can save.
Yeah. And again, you have no idea, right? For those that are watching, right? It's the awareness of budgeting. And I think why budgeting gets that negative connotation is the worry that the moment I budget, I need to spend less, right? I think that's where it comes from, right? It's like, I'm afraid that I budget and now I can't enjoy the things that I want to. But think about that for 1 second, right? There's that level of guilt there, right? In terms of spending. And so, yes, of course, there are things that maybe you can't spend once you find it out. But more importantly, that budget awareness is to actually hope for the other side around, which is now I know I can go golfing every week, right? Because it's part of my budget and I can do it without any guilt. Or I can go buy this thing and fully enjoy it, right? Without having to worry that, was I really able to afford that, right? And I think that's where that budget awareness comes back in and ties back into all of what we're talking about today, which is if I want to accomplish retirement, right? Like, it's really more about making sure that whatever you actually put away by the time that you get to that point, that $500 that I talked about, should come after the idea that what Nathan says, that you have $500 to actually save. Because otherwise you're setting up yourself for a really difficult situation, right? That you're putting away $500, but then later down the year, you're like, wait a minute, I didn't budget for this, or I didn't know I needed this. Now you're pulling $3,000 out. Now you took, right, like a step back in terms of actually trying to budget. So step one of having successful budget, whether it's for retirement, for other goals, short-term or long-term, is to actually have some awareness around your budget. And there's so many tools out there, okay? Things from Mint to Personal Capital, right? I mean, they're just all these tools nowadays with technology that gives you the ability to see, right, your numbers. The difficulty, though, could be that data volume. Right now you have a lot of data, but I think the starting point would be to try to track that, right? To try to see some of that data for yourself.
And honestly, like, clients that come to us that maybe haven't saved before, just the act of starting your savings is helpful. Right? I often find a lot of motivations around spending changes once you start that savings account, that brokerage account. You keep adding to it, you see it grow, you get excited, right? It's like, oh, I saved $10,000 over the last 2 years. Awesome. I want to make that 20,000. I'm not going to spend this so that I can go fund that savings or brokerage account instead. And so I think just the act of savings and getting that mechanism started logistically is super motivating and will change your spending and therefore kind of change your perception of putting a spending plan together as well. The other consideration or tip that we like to give is you don't have to perfectly optimize starting day one, right? If we identify, maybe you do put that budget together, you identify, hey, maybe I can save $1,000 a month. Well, why don't we start with 500 and slowly inch our way to that $1,000 so you don't feel so stressed about it and having to force yourself to be perfect right away. And then what happens when you get pay raises, right? You get promoted at work, you get a pay raise at annual review season. If you don't consciously save that money, you are also just giving yourself permission to spend that money, whether you recognize it or not. Mm-hmm. So as much as it is helpful to get that saving started now, also recognize that when your income changes, you need to revisit that savings plan to make that conscious decision to increase your savings. Or if you don't, you're just going to, again, give yourself that permission to spend, and then might not be the best decision. Yeah. So having that awareness is super helpful when you get those promotions and raises too.
And of course, we've said awareness a couple of times now. And I think that's the key about budgeting. It's not about immediately jumping to a conclusion of, I need to do this. It's being aware of where you are today is such a key part of having a sustainable, okay? It's a sustainable budget strategy, right? Cutting everything out today, probably not sustainable, because in a month, you're gonna be like, ooh, I need to do all these things again. And I think that leads me to thinking the time that we are in, right? I mean, we're in a global pandemic, right? We've been forced to be at home. And when we're at home, our budgets have changed. Now maybe certain grocery budgets and things have gone up because you're eating out less. But here's a good exercise: is to think about where your spending has been and say, how comfortable am I with that? Like, am I, what things do I want to add back? What things don't I need anymore? Right? I think it's a good evaluation for yourself, because most people's spending has been less. And how is that lower spending? How do you feel about that actual lower spending? Did you now realize that there are a lot of things that maybe you didn't need, right? Or the other way around, maybe there are things like travel that you really value, and now you want to budget for that, or allocate some extra cash for that, and that's okay, right? It's about finding a balance in life, right? And that's part of it, finding a balance in your budget too, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think the part that gets a lot of people is just taking the time and effort to do it. And hopefully these are some tips and ideas to really get started. The other tip I want to bring out, Nate, is like where you spend. Like, I think if you have 10 different credit cards, 14 different checking accounts, budgeting is that much harder, right?
Oh, sounds like a nightmare.
Right? Yeah. And so you want to be able to say, if you're really serious about budgeting, slim down where you're at, your money is. Have one or two checking accounts, have one or two credit cards, right? If you're in a family, try to be on one credit card together, and now you basically have an automated tracker of how much you spend if everything goes on that credit card. Watch that credit card and see how that is. And I think that's part of like splitting everything out, because emotionally, maybe having 5 credit cards feels good because you don't actually see how much exactly you spend, because they're all in different cycles, different time periods. Align those cycles. You can actually call your credit card company and say, I want everything to be aligned. Okay. Those are things that people realize, but it's little things like that that really make an impact to the way that you see your financials, or see your credit card spend. So consolidating, slimming down, making sure they're all aligned, using 1 or 2 credit cards only, try those things out. And I think that alone will give you a lot of more insight into your budget. It's not going to happen overnight. I think that's what Nate mentioned. This isn't something that changes right away, but slowly and surely, if you're motivated to do it, starting to put some money away after you see if you can or not, changes the way you think about spending.
Definitely. And one last thing to add, oftentimes when you accomplish your goal, you bought that car, you bought that house, you tend to let off the pedal a little bit, give yourself permission to relax, not save. I think that's something that you should be ultra aware of and try not to, right? You've already spent the time to put that spending strategy together to save. Keep that going once you've accomplished your goal.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, I think we gave a lot of great tips about the way that someone should think about budgeting. And we're hoping that you guys can put some of those in place and in work, even if it's not someone, if you guys aren't our clients or just watching this, right? Really, right? The awareness of budgeting, the use of credit cards, right? Use the tools that you already have at hand to try to build yourself a strategy, especially coming out of this pandemic. Hopefully you can really put more importance and priority of where you're spending things, and find some more enjoyment in the things that you do day to day, okay? Next week, okay, again, something that we're going to jump into for Money Mythbusters is going to be an idea about pre-tax versus post-tax. Okay, so that's going to be pre-tax retirement account versus post-tax, like Roth retirement account. Which one is actually better, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But to close things out, if you know the idea of budgeting, these topics that we're talking about is intriguing to you, you want to learn more, you want our help with it, more individualized help with this, or from our team, right? Let me know, or through our website, compasscmg.com. You'll be able to find a link to be able to schedule a call with us, and we'd be more than happy to see how our advice can help with your financial situation. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Nate. Thank you for joining me. Happy Friday. We'll hopefully be
Happy Friday.
soon.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.